Welcome back to another unplanned video by me. I kind of shot myself in the foot with my previous video because I didn't censor any of the language throughout the duration, and YouTube didn't seem to like that very much because I noticed a drop in where my video was recommended in my analytics. If you didn't catch it, I did an analysis on iDubbbz's old Content Cop series, and I'm really proud of the work that I did, so if you haven't caught it, please go watch it, give it a like if you will. In efforts to keep my channel alive, I decided to do this short video regarding a recent-ish back and forth on the platform between patients Xina and Noah Samsen, revolving around the upcoming Little Mermaid movie. I'm still gonna do my deep dive on that 2017 creator as promised in my previous video. I just actually want to make sure that it will be able to gain traction before I actually edit another long ass analysis. So if you like my videos or if you like me, remember to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss another video from me when I inevitably get beaten out of the algorithm yet again. So without further ado, Patience is a relatively new creator on YouTube who is growing exponentially. Her rapid growth more than likely has something to do with her calm, confident demeanor, as well as more of her moderate opinions juxtaposed to the stereotypes of what opinions Black people should have. Moderate in this case is going to be referring to the actual definition of moderate rather than that of the political sense. In September of last year, Patience published a video on her thoughts regarding Ariel's casting in the upcoming Little Mermaid movie. This piece was primarily centered on exploring alternative thoughts as to why the masses would be upset as to why Ariel was now to be played by a Black actress.
It seems like the summary of the takes that I've seen so far is very much race swapping good. If you disagree, bad, you bigot. And I have a lot of issues with this for a number of reasons.
Her theories include sentimentalism, nostalgia, and of course red hair erasure, where she provides 3 examples across the Disney conglomerate where redheads have been recasted as Black girls or women.
As Hollywood strives to become more inclusive, they've decided that red-haired female characters are going to be their collateral damage. And what I mean by that is every time we have new Black representation, we lose red-haired white women's representation.
The horror! The video's intent was to potentially find non-racial arguments and reasonings for people's rage, and in doing so, she also did not address the very prevalent racist claims as well. Patience wanted to attempt to find nuance in the situation rather than just typecasting everyone as a racist. She closes out the video by stating Disney and other media companies need to be pushed to create more original Black characters rather than just lazily race swapping an already iconic character, and thereby causing unwarranted racialized tension and division. I see her work has already made its rounds throughout YouTube and has gotten several critique videos that I frankly do not care to watch, but a large creator by the name of Noah Samsen took the liberty of directly responding to Patience's video, offering what he claimed to be friendly critique, and then Patience responded to him. I thought it would be fun to examine both of the response videos and throw in my commentary here and there, and that's what we're doing. As much does in the Americanosphere, the Little Mermaid debate became heavily intertwined with politics. This is evident in how Noah frames his response to Patience.
Okay, my fear here is that videos like this open up the possibility, not just ideologically, but algorithmically, that people may be swayed into far-right thinking by starting with this seemingly innocuous interpretation of an anti-Black controversy. Upon hearing this take from a creator who is co-opting the aesthetics of nuance without actually functionally providing that nuance, viewers may be pushed into anti-woke and eventually far-right echo chambers without realizing it until it's too late. If your content leans anti-woke, it's only a matter of time before YouTube plugs you in with some of the channels that we looked at today, enmeshing audiences that fit into this anti-woke disposition, all of whom love to hear these points get raised. You can't say anything these days, they'll cancel you for it. Feminists are causing problems again, oh no. Is the internet really defending fat people that squished a conservative influencer on a plane? These all strike me as signifiers of a very well-established way to grow on YouTube.
It is very politically driven, but if you're not American, please do keep in mind when people throw around the terms liberal or conservative, it's not always in the dead-on political sense. Most Americans do believe your political alignments do heavily tie into your own personal morality and ethics. That's why a lot of conservatives tend to believe that liberals are very unethical and vice versa. This is why these phrases are often spoken as if they describe someone's moral character and why they can sound like insults at times. Patience, an English woman if you didn't catch the accent, stated that her video on the Little Mermaid was in no way meant to be a political critique or politicized in any way.
That content will help them develop this conservative, anti-woke disposition.
This is the first time that Noah reveals his true intentions with this video, when he starts to mention things like conservatism and how he dislikes people who have anti-woke rhetoric. Because I truly believe this video has nothing to do with Ariel and nothing to do with black representation. I think that what Noah truly cares about is politics. You've assumed that my video was political when it had absolutely no political intent whatsoever. I was simply a black woman talking about black representation and my issues that I have with the way that Hollywood chooses to go about it. I also decided to provide other explanations as to why people were having issues with this race swap.
Fair enough. There is an over-politicization of black women expressing their opinions online. Because of our opinions, researched or not, in conjunction with our appearance, our content is often viewed only from a politicized lens. This is exemplified in vocally apolitical creators like Kidology and more philosophy-driven channels like Khadijah Limbo. The topics these creators commentate on or discuss could be referenced or applied to some sort of politics, of course, but we should acknowledge that most of the time that isn't actually their intent. Politicizing patience analysis is one of the only ways Noah felt that he could engage critically with her content.
However, once things enter the political realm, as I feel that they have in this video, with it being a discussion of race and ethics and media, I feel like this kind of stuff is important.
This is because he is of the belief that Patience's content that thrives under the veil of nuance unintentionally pushes alt-right rhetoric. This is a new turn of phrase on the internet right now. In my interpretation, it involves a benign creator producing opinions that are probably more centrist or moderate while presenting arguments from both political extremes, or in Patience's case, arguments that just come from different places, and not really fully aligning themselves with either or. Instead, they typically either fall into more of a middle ground, don't have a fully formed opinion, or don't have a strong opinion. Because the creator lives in some type of gray space, it does not entirely align with the online left. The creator is sometimes called a gateway to the alt-right. Much like marijuana was never a gateway drug, this argument is based on the slippery slope fallacy and is ridiculous. Creators like Blair White more so fit this bill. She is a political commentator who seems to hold some leftist ideologies, but is overwhelmingly more aligned with the far right regarding matters of trans identity in relation to minors. However, with the latter portion, it is of popular opinion, mine included, that Blair streamlines one-sided, incredibly biased information to her audience that favors the right, even when she is claiming to be more of a centrist or scientifically based. She would be a more accurate representation of someone whose content may either intentionally or unintentionally lead people to the alt-right. Patience, on the other hand, is just a young woman talking about her opinions on the internet who more so seems to believe in individualism and free thinking. She does not align with any part of the political spectrum, and therefore, from a generalized American perspective, some of her opinions may seem to align with the right, while some may seem to align with the left. And I think that would actually be the case for most people, especially those who are not frequently online. However, the conversation surrounding the Little Mermaids being black is most certainly an American-dominated conversation. It is a largely insignificant issue created by an American-based company that revolves around race. Of course it's an American-driven conversation. This is our bread and butter. And in the United States, our politics often intersect and intertwine with race and ethnic background, gender and sex, immigration status, sexuality, everything. We can critique this to death, but it won't simply change just because we talk about it online. For this change to occur, referring to the way in which the American political system operates as well as our governing structure, both would have to be deconstructed fully. It won't change just because non-Americans, particularly the English, think that it's stupid. I understand that to a lot of non-American people, the political conversations in the States seem heavily racialized because they are, but that has everything to do with how the country has been constructed constructed to operate. And if you're not living in it every day, I wouldn't expect for you to see the utility in the conversations or understand how deep-rooted this structure has been embedded within American systems. All this to say, Noah stated patients' theories on as to why people could be upset about Ariel's being black could not exist outside of a vacuum.
Most of the points being raised here are fine when made in a vacuum. However, when they're made in opposition to the casting of a black actor in a white fish character role, their most visible function is to validate racism, to validate those who want to protect whiteness as an identity, to defend the cultural hegemony of white supremacy. Not to mention unfairly denigrate an actor who, at least according to the people that actually made the film, absolutely earned this role.
And while I do think that is an overstatement, I think he is somewhat right. When you're looking at the situation, a lot of the conversations were dominated with the thought that Ariel should remain white or Ariel should not be black because of the original Disney source material. As Patience stated, these ideas may be driven more so by nostalgia or sentimentalism or the very questionable notion of redhead erasure, but for non-black people, I do believe they tend to dip more into the racial side of discourse. And I say this because of examples like the ones Noah presented and because of things that I've personally seen on TikTok.
Upon release of the trailer, the hashtag #NotMyAriel began trending on Twitter. The hashtag was used to share racist comments and memes like these, which date back to when Bailey's casting was first announced in 2019, but were recirculated when the new trailer was released in September. The YouTube video of the trailer was dislike bombed, with the current count at 3.2 million dislikes.
However, no matter what reasoning led to people's disdain for Ariel's now blackness, the end point of every single one of these arguments is the same. It was inappropriate to change Ariel's race to black. And that is putting it kindly. And this will always ring as racially driven, though they may not necessarily come from racist ideologies. And because certain ideas like redhead erasure can sometimes dip more into an unconscious bias territory, when we have these kinds of discussions, we have to zone out on people's spoken intentions, as in the intentions they are explicitly stating, and look at how the groups who are impacted are interpreting their actions, and examine how those actions have affected those groups. And in this case, it would be a large amount of undue hate going towards both the black community and Halle Bailey. And I know I keep dunking on the red hair erasure thing, and the reason is to say that redheads are being erased would mean that they were intentionally being targeted with the goal to either breed them away, like the Aboriginals in Australia, silence them, like the Indigenous in the United States, or to avoid giving them representation of any kind because they are seen as largely undesirable on screen, much like the Black and Latino populations in Hollywood. While at certain points in history this has been done to gingers, and while gingers do face a level of discrimination in certain areas like the United Kingdom, that context doesn't really apply here to this particular movie, this very American-driven movie. Erasure is a pretty hefty term to just throw around just because an animated character who has never been an accurate portrayal of the average ginger person had their race changed to black. The cartoon Ariel featured bright red hair, not orangish red, not deep red, not red with undertones, just red. I would argue that this was more of an aesthetic choice rather than an active decision to give representation to the redheads of the world, especially when you put it into the much needed context of American media where redheads are often depicted in an overly sexualized manner, similar to the bombshell blonde. Interestingly enough, it is theorized that Ariel was originally meant to be a blonde, but she was made to be a redhead because Disney wanted to distinguish The Little Mermaid from another well-received mermaid movie at the time called Splash. Ariel features not a lick of freckles, and again, I'm basing this on the average ginger person. I'm aware not all redheads have freckles, but it would have been a more accurate portrayal had she had freckles if we're really going to sit here and say that she was meant to represent redheads. Ariel was designed to be eye-catching and to be seen as free-spirited. Her red hair adds a sense of whimsy and fun, especially when it is starkly contrast from the rest of her family who were all blondes or brunettes and were all duty bound. And the red hair is also just very complimentary to her bright green tail and her purple seashell bra. I believe Ariel's color palette was simply incidental. This is pretty evident when you contrast her to Merida, or even to Tiana from Princess and the Frog, who was actually given distinctly Afrocentric features. But even if you want to concede and say, hey, maybe that's not how Disney meant it, but that's how I took it. Fair enough. But as Noah pointed out, the new version of Ariel does have red hair.
Allow the redheads to keep their representation and create new Black Disney princesses.
And right off the bat, I do find this point strange, because in this new trailer, I'm almost positive that Ariel has red hair. Like she has the hair. It's reddish orange hair, I think.
A more accurate portrayal of red hair, might I add, since it appears to be an orangey color that is more commonly found in gingers. At least from what we can see on the grainy gray teaser thing that they released. But I'm not dense. I know the problem is not the hair color. It's the color of the skin of the person portraying the redhead, isn't it? It's the fact that this version of the Little Mermaid sports dreadlocks. Right? Redheads with fairer complexions may have issues with seeing themselves in a portrayal that features a Black woman. This is just a far-fetched, roundabout way to find a non-racial reason to despise a new children's movie. Though we may all have deep-seated feelings of nostalgia and love for certain Disney films, these remakes are not made with the 90s and early 2000 kids in mind. They are made with the current generation in mind, who are very fortunately growing up seeing an immense amount of diversity on the big screen. Current children often have no reference of source material, and even if they did and were able to register the race swap, I guarantee they would not care about it unless they were told to. Some very big points in both Patience and Noah's videos are the following: bias dictating the construction of one's own video, that bias masquerading as nuanced opinions and analysis, and the thought of creating echo chambers amongst their audiences. For Patience, she believes that Noah advocates for echo chambers by criticizing her opinions that were meant to create some sort of middle ground, and for stating that she would lead people to the far right.
He doesn't give a crap about how Black people feel about Black representation. His issue with me and my channel is that some of my views do align with conservative views, and because I am very moderate in my views and very moderate in a lot of my stances, my channel has attracted a combination audience. Some of my viewers are conservative, some of my viewers are left-wing. I think his biggest concern is that the left-wing part of my audience are going to suddenly be exposed to the most dangerous thing of all, which is a different perspective. I actually genuinely don't believe in echo chambers. Noah quite clearly does believe in echo chambers, because he's essentially at this point fear-mongering to his audience about the dangers of them potentially being taken on the path of discovering alternative perspectives and alternative views.
She believes Noah's intentions of critiquing her video were purely politically motivated because of his bias as an American viewer and alleged ally.
You are viewing my video with assumptions based on your biased American political lens. Race is a lot more of a political subject for you guys in America.
Both of those factors provoked him into informing a Black woman on how she should be viewing this type of situation, simply because her opinions didn't fully align with his or the online left. For Noah, he believes Patience's video could inadvertently be used by the alt-right to further slander the new Little Mermaid installment, and it could possibly sway people to the right in general. He stated that her bias may have shielded her from understanding that her content could further normalize white supremacy rhetoric.
I do think that this video serves to normalize white supremacist rhetoric in a way that might not be intended. I feel like this kind of stuff is important. And while true nuance is definitely a difficult thing to achieve, there's a certain low bar to even meet the definition of the word nuance that isn't being cleared here.
Nuance on the internet is such an interesting thing because we often forget what it actually is. I interpret a nuanced discussion as being able to understand the argumentation and logic behind multiple different ideas and perspectives, and having the ability to distinguish seemingly minuscule variations between them all. Those variations often come into play to help us understand where someone may have misinterpreted, where they may have been misinformed or misled, or where we just simply disagree on a fundamental level. Nuance is supposed to aid us in understanding others and determining root cause. However, it is often misconstrued as needing to expose yourself to alternative political ideas, as Patience suggests.
God forbid people on the left explore some of the viewpoints that exist on the right, because that is scary.
I have to interject here for clarity's sake. It isn't wrong or bad to explore differing political ideas. I would regularly encourage it. However, because Patience is our English friend from across the sea, I have to reiterate that the Americanized practice of political opinions being tied to one's own morality, it is not as simplistic as exploring all ideas at times, because we cannot ignore the bigotry that often comes from the online right or the thoughtless and baseless postulations of the online left. If non-Americans want to continue weighing in on American political discourse, we're going to need to come to an understanding that morality and political leanings often move hand in hand here. This is something I had to learn because, if you're unaware, I more so identify as apolitical, and because of that, it was hard for me to see how deeply people ingrain their ethics into their politics. You can think that this idea is ludicrous, but it is the reality. Or pushing someone else to agree with you because you believe your personal beliefs are the correct set, as Noah suggests. It is often said online that we all have bias, and this is true enough. However, we do not all have bias in all discussions. Being biased would indicate that someone has an inclination to be prejudiced towards or against one side. It is possible to remove a large amount of bias by simply temporarily removing oneself from preconceived notions and actually intentionally trying to understand someone else's rationale. Having the ability to do this requires someone to not see themselves as the end-all opinion. It requires someone to be able to see that they may be wrong or lacking information. And for this reason, it is not an easy thing to do, and it will always be a deliberate action. In her response video, Patience demonstrated the ability to admit that she may have misstepped by not giving any consideration to actual racism revolving the Little Mermaid debacle.
I definitely did not spend enough time, or any time to be honest, really addressing the racism backlash that had also occurred. And there is a part where I misspeak within the video and say that this is not happening because of racism, when I meant to say this is not only happening because of racism.
But I'm very sure this is not because of Noah's critique. It's probably because her own audience gave her that feedback, or it was something that Patience was able to catch on her own after posting the original video. I'm pointing this out because this is the key to Patience not encasing herself within an echo chamber, and it is something that you typically don't see with larger commentators. So let's talk about echo chambers for a bit. To create an echo chamber as a YouTube creator, the creator would have to follow a very specific formula. Step 1, present a problem. Step 2, present information or ideas that directly refute or minimize that problem, and then lead your audience to a simplistic conclusion that aligns with your personal opinions. The creator would have to then ignore or delete dissenting opinions in their comment sections, or make response videos screaming about how they only receive hate when they are actually receiving critical feedback. Patience is a very new channel, though she is very fast growing, and for that reason, I don't believe it was necessarily accurate or fair for Noah to state that she could be facilitating an echo chamber. Now, to Patience's point in reference to Noah encouraging echo chambers by dissuading his audience from far right or right center opinions, we are shown a genuine bias of hers towards the online left. It is very telling to see her persistently denounce the left, and while not necessarily uplifting the right, but she does consistently speak of the online right as if they just have different opinions. I do realize not all right-leaning people are bigots, but the online right? They are just as bad as the online left, guys. We should not ignore the bigotry that comes from the online right, and that is what Patience largely does in both her original and follow-up videos. However, we also need to acknowledge the importance of tone and language. If I were Patience, I would not be too keen on listening to Noah's critiques because his video has the undertones of someone who is very pedant.
So Patience's conclusion in this video is that instead of race swapping these characters, we need more black stories. Stop the pandering remakes and make new, good, non-white centered stories instead. This is by far the best reason one could give for disagreeing with Bailey's casting. It's the most popular reason, found in plenty of other YouTube videos and many comment sections, and it's also, I think, profoundly unconvincing.
On the other hand, if I was in Noah's shoes, I would probably roll my eyes at Patience because her tone can be very haughty at times.
So sorry, Noah. I didn't realize that I had to convince you about my feelings about my representation. The superiority complex is wild.
We all owe no one anything, not tone, not evidence, not an argument, but we can't keep saying we want to have conversations and to not have echo chambers and then not shape our tones to match. And if we don't want to have conversations with others, that's fine. We should just say that instead of disguising it as nuance. I wanted to talk about this one last thing very briefly because I have an entire creator picked out that I'm going to fully explore this idea with. I'm so excited for that video. But a persisting theme throughout Patience's response to Noah was about white allyship and their proclivity to uplift their own voices in particularly racial discussions.
Even though the stuff that I'm saying also echoes the sentiments of many black people who were sick and tired of having race swaps be our main form of representation, he is uninterested in that because all this is to him is a game of politics, and I am just a piece on a chessboard, and I am not moving in the way that he wants me to move, and so that is why we have a problem. Because that is what many of us minorities are to these white liberals, is just pawns in their political game.
Noah, a presumably white man, created a thought piece directly geared at Patience, a black woman, regarding the nuance behind the conversations of race swapping. I'm not a proponent of saying white people can't be a part of these types of discussions. I actually think quite the opposite, but I will say Noah had to have known that this was going to be an uphill battle. It is hard for a white person who self-identifies as a liberal to engage in this type of topical online conversation because it can come off as them presuming to know the answers to racial disputes even though they have never struggled with such issues. Marginalized groups do typically have an inherent leg up on white counterparts in these types of discussions because it is something that we often think about because we live it. White people will typically have to be introduced to or educated about such conversations, which is why some say to listen before interjecting. This is not always true, nor should anyone be excluded from societal level dialogues, but do leave room for doubt and criticism. I'm interpreting Patience's demeanor in her response video as very censorious towards Noah because she probably feels like he oversteps his bounds as an ally by presuming that he could tell a black woman how to feel about Ariel's depiction. To some extent, I do see this in his video as well. I'm going to assume that it was unintentional, but much like how Patience did not acknowledge the racist commentary towards Bailey's Ariel, Noah did not acknowledge the fact that he will never be impacted by Ariel's depiction in any way, shape, or form, and therefore he may be missing some key talking points. This is actually a better example of how echo chambers can affect a person. When a person is engulfed in only one type of opinion, in this case it would be liberal ideals, they will begin to memorize the formula of the correct opinion and will eventually begin regurgitating those talking points. With Noah's piece, I say he is hyper-focusing on the very valid criticisms of racist commentary, yes, but he is also fixated on the importance of representation out of the lens of white liberalism. White liberalism encourages vacuumous paragons like colorblindness, which sounds good in theory, but disregards genuine nuance and intersectionality, as well as the understanding that most people of color do not actually want their racial and ethnic identities and distinctions erased. Rather, we prefer to see them preserved, properly represented, and respected. White liberalism ignores the thoughts of the people that it claims to want to help. Noah is ignoring the voices of many black people that are actually not a fan of race swapping, of which Patience does provide a few different examples. He does not have to agree with those opinions, much like Patience does not have to agree with his, but he should acknowledge them rather than acting as if they do not exist. And those voices, in the context of race swapping a character to being black, those black voices are much more needed than his. This change was made predominantly for black people, or rather our wallets. So black voices should be elevated so Disney, as if they give a rat's ass, but black voices should be elevated so that Disney can see whether or not their mission of representing black people has actually succeeded. It is much like how I would want to see Hispanic and Latino voices elevated if they were to make a live action version of Encanto or Coco. It's much like how I enjoyed seeing Chinese people rip apart the live action version of Mulan. Noah, as well as other white people, you know, their voices are also needed, but they just shouldn't always be the loudest. If you're at all curious about my take on Ariel's race swapping, it is that I do not care. Her race was not essential to her character, nor was it essential to her features or the story at large, so I have no problem with it. I wouldn't want to see Jasmine made into any other race, nor would I want to see Tiana of any other race, because their racial backgrounds are crucial to their characters. I do have a preference for original, diverse characters, but I recognize how uninspired and thoughtless Disney is. They are a conglomerate that will continue to morph with the times. Now that they have seen just how far the black dollar can go with movies like Princess and the Frog, Black Panther, Spider-Verse, they will now be more willing to continue to create more content to tell stories outside of whiteness. It is often very ignored in this conversation that the race swap of a Disney princess, as they're doing all of these remakes that no one asked for, it was inevitable, not only to pander, but to directly prevent themselves from repeating their own history. For decades upon decades, little black and brown kids were unable to see themselves in Disney movies except for the odd one here and there. And even when that representation was had, it was largely inaccurate, stereotypical, or offensive. Disney has almost always been predominantly white focused and white based. This is evident in their Disney princess lineup. The most underrepresented demographic was black people, of course, who were typically seen as either undeserving or too unappealing for a princess movie. Now that they are shoving remakes down our throats, did you really think they weren't going to change the race of at least one white princess to give more presence to an underrepresented demographic? Hell no. This was Disney's opportunity to rewrite their own history. Introducing new black characters and original stories is great and all, but what if they made a statement by changing the race of one of their iconic princesses? You can call it lazy, pandering, a cash grab, and I would agree with all of that, but it was also very inescapable. All I can say is at least this generation of kids will grow up with a Disney that actually showcases every demographic of person. And all races of people can be seen in the soft, gentle light of princesshood. We should keep critiquing Disney and Hollywood for their performative actions and demand more, but we should also be able to smile at the videos of all the little black girls finally seeing themselves in a well-beloved princess. I just wanted to talk about this little debacle because both creators made good points and both kind of fumbled in some areas, but they are both great examples of how online discourses can go haywire when we are not actually listening to one another. And that is it for me today. Remember to like and subscribe, and until next time,